Order of the day number 2.
Environmental Protection Authority Bill, committee stage.
I declare the House in committee for consideration of the Environmental Protection Authority Bill.
Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Chairman.
The House in Committee on the Environmental Protection Authority Bill. The question is that Part 1 stand part. Charles Chevelle.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I want to begin by making a couple of preliminary observations around Part 1 of the EPA bill. And really the first observation relates to the way in which the legislation is structured. And this reflects comments that were made by the Labor Party in our minority report during the Select Committee process. So the difficulty with what has emerged from what the Minister has put in front of the House is that rather than a comprehensive, strong, independent environmental regulator able to provide sectoral leadership, which is so badly needed in this country, we have a piecemeal reform. Now, the Minister promised early on that we would have, for example, regulation of the marine and coastal environment brought under the EPA, that we would have the activities being conducted in the exclusive economic zone within the purview of the EPA. Well, sir, we don't have that. We have a promise from the Minister that although he said that last year, there'd be further legislation at some point to confer those powers. So that's not good enough. It should have been done with this legislation. And so that's particularly so given the massive increase in prospecting and exploration activity that we're seeing off the coast of New Zealand at the moment. There does need to be proper, strong, central oversight of that activity. There needs to be a body that's responsible for consulting with communities and iwi about these issues. The Minister makes much of the work that the establishment EPA has done already in terms of getting big projects going. Well, sir, what's needed is central oversight, strong oversight, careful environmental management and careful monitoring of all that offshore exploratory activity. And before that, what's needed, quite obviously, is strong consultation with affected communities. One of the reasons, sir, that we're seeing so much disquiet, so much objection to existing drilling activity is because there hasn't been that consultation. Communities that are affected, particularly iwi, don't feel that they have any sort of stake in the exploration activity that's going on at the moment. And I want to hear from the Minister, sir, if he's able to address this question as to why this hasn't been put into the purposes and objects of the bill, because the EPA should be responsible for that. When people hear that we have an Environmental Protection Authority, they assume that this is one of the core functions that this body ought to be undertaking. Now, I know that the Minister tried on this occasion to get that function in, but he hasn't managed to get that set of activities taken into the work of the EPA yet. That's at least the assumption I've made. If there hasn't been yet a strong attempt, we should know as to why. And if it is going to go in, we really need to know when. Because if we don't have some sort of certainty about this issue, the risk, as the Minister knows, is that we'll have a central environmental agency that'll be weak. And I think we've seen the dangers that result as far as policy making and enforcement are concerned that come from a weak central environmental agency. We all wish the EPA well. We want to see a strong, independent, successful voice that'll work as an advocate for the environment. We want to see expertise deployed in the centre that will allow for New Zealand's incredible environmental potential to be realised. The worry here has to be that because of the odd piecemeal conferral of functions on the Environmental Protection Authority, we're not going to get that. and in particular there'll be major worries about public confidence in the entity. If all this offshore activity is going to go on for a period of time until the Minister can get that central oversight function conferred upon the EPA, and if it's going to occur in the current regulatory vacuum where, we've heard already this week from the Acting Minister that the only effective oversight body as far as offshore exploration at the moment is the Maritime Safety Authority. Well, that's not good enough. It's not good enough because we know, Mr Chairman,
Charles Cheval.
We know that there are many, many entities interested in ensuring that they can engage in offshore exploration. There should be that central oversight, and there isn't. So the other two matters that I wanted to just advert to in this initial contribution relate to, first of all, the general structure of the bill. I've already said that it doesn't include oversight of offshore exploration and EEZ activity, and it should. I do hope we'll hear from the Minister as to if and when it will, because he has given some undertakings on that issue that haven't yet been fulfilled. The other odd thing about the way that this body is set up is that it takes functions under this bill from different entities. It takes on the has-no functions from IRMA, and it takes on the climate registry functions. It takes on certain other functions. And in order to understand what the powers of the EPA are in any particular case, you're going to have to read the relevant empowering legislation alongside the particular other act in question, be it the Has-No Act, the RMA, or otherwise the Climate Change Response Act. It's a clumsy way to require people to understand what New Zealand's environmental law is. It isn't a good way to promote accessibility of the law. It's not a good way to allow the layperson to be able to understand immediately what the particular environmental statutory requirements are in any particular case. It would be much better if we were presented with an omnibus, comprehensive piece of environmental legislation that set out not only the EPA's functions in a comprehensive sense, but also an environmental code that the EPA was responsible for administering, rather than having to go to all these different statutes and different statutory instruments, because that's the other aspect of this law that's of concern. You have to go to a lot of delegated legislation and tertiary legislation to understand what the requirements of the law are in any case. Environmental law ought to be simpler and more accessible than that, sir. So the final point I want to make relates to the treaty obligations that are in the bill, or rather that aren't in the bill, because that's the problem. Now, the different environmental statutes that will affect the work of the EPA all have treaty clauses in them. But of course they're different treaty clauses. The Resource Management Act and the Hazardous Substances and New Organisms Act have requirements to take into account the principles of the treaty, and they also refer to te tiriti. So by implication, one is to look at the English and Māori versions of the text. However, the Conservation Act and the Climate Change Response Act only require the giving effect to the principles of the treaty, and there is no reference to te tiriti. So, sir, I've tabled a supplementary order paper that would remedy that concern, that would actually expressly require the EPA to take into account the principles of the treaty in the carrying out of its work. And I think that would be a much more preferable way to proceed than to give the authority this four-headed mandate where it has to work out on any particular occasion whether it's to give effect to or take into account of the principles. I'm aware that my parliamentary colleague Rahui Kātane has also tabled an SOP on this matter. I've indicated to her that we would be supportive of the approach in that supplementary order paper. I would have preferred that it had been at the Select Committee so that people could have made submissions on it. It is unsatisfactory that this sort of thing has to come up this late in the debate, and I'm a bit sad that the Māori Party wasn't able to influence the National Party, its coalition partner, on the question. But either way, whether we go with the Māori Party's supplementary order paper or the one that I have tabled, I would urge the Minister to consider favourably the question of giving the EPA right from the start an express and clear treaty obligation, given that every other piece of environmental legislation currently on the books in New Zealand does that. Sir, I think that point in particular is one that it would be useful to hear a response from the Minister on. Clearly on the other issue that I raised, the piecemeal nature of this legislation, it's too late at this stage to fix it, but on the treaty question it would be helpful to hear a response.
I call